Dr. Eva, thank you for joining me. We're going to be talking today about EMFs and emotional well-being. And the reason I wanted to have you on was because I heard you speaking with Lloyd Burrell in that wonderful conference. And can you tell the listeners about your background? And I'm particularly interested in having a discussion about EMFs and our own experiences, because I heard a little bit about your story and I wanted to share a little bit about mine. So if you could go ahead, but first talk about your background as much as you want to tell the listeners.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, first of all, on your show, Molly. I have been studying natural medicine for over 2 decades. I think it's coming to pretty much 21, 22 years now. And originally, I got interested in nutrition. I had all sorts of digestive issues at the time. So that was sort of the natural thing for me to go towards, as it is for many people. But then I sort of realized that actually my issues were more emotional than they were physical, really. And so I expanded and I've expanded, and I did a doctorate in biochemistry and physiology and nutrition. I am now in the middle of another doctorate degree in holistic medicine. So I've accumulated a lot of modalities over the years, because when you work with people, particularly what I do, I work with really complex health conditions. And so I find that when I have a good overview of many different modalities, I am really able to work more effectively with people. So these days I work at the physical level, so I work with the biochemistry, but I also work at the emotional level, and I work at the energetic level. So these are the three sort of main layers. Of course, nothing is separate, everything affects everything else, as we will be talking more about in this interview. But I think people may even start to realize that there is more to keeping healthy than just eating healthily and exercise. So particularly people who have chronic symptoms, often there is an emotional component. In fact, most of the time there is an emotional component. And of course, we were talking about EMFs today, and that's obviously the energetic impact, and our energetic blueprint, our energetic body obviously will be affected by any energetic influences, whether it is good or bad. And we need to consider that when we're looking at whether it's healing chronic symptoms that we have, or actually keeping or maintaining health.
Yes, and I thought, looking at your blog and your website, you're very well-rounded. You used to have, I mean, obviously you like to be outdoors and staying grounded in the physical, and I try to do that also. That helps you stay balanced. But with the EMFs, it does seem they affect you on these different levels. And I saw I could relate to what you were saying about the emotional root of what you were experiencing in your body on your when you were in your story. And because as a child, I used to worry a lot, and one of my teachers wrote on my yearbook, "Molly worries a lot." And this was at 13, and this was kind of a lead-in to my difficulties with an eating disorder that lasted through my teens. So I think it started with kind of a sense of trauma in the home. And then what I find interesting about EMFs is that I'm in my 50s now, early 50s, and this is something that snuck up on me later in life because I wasn't aware of the effect it was having. My husband and I, we live pretty healthy lives. We try to eat organic. We grow our own food. But we were living in a school bus up until very recently, and we had Wi-Fi, and it was kind of this Faraday cage effect inside. And I used to feel vertigo, very obvious signs that I was being affected by the Wi-Fi. And I used to, at that time, looking back, I feel I can smile at it now, because I was thinking that it was the changes that were happening. It was a very kind of unusual, a lot of discussion about the cosmic energies around 2008, 2009, and leading up to 2012. And so I was attributing it to solar flares and all kinds of things, but I was sitting at a laptop that had a air card, and we were in a metal structure that was ungrounded. And I didn't even get sick then, it just accumulated. So I started to feel some very physical symptoms. So which many of them I have reversed. But what do you see in your clients? Is it something that they start to realize and they kind of check off everything that it isn't, and then they finally start to question it? Or do you find that it's helpful to talk about that early on?
I do find that it's helpful considering it early on, but people don't, because it's an invisible toxin, isn't it? It's an invisible toxin, and you're right, it does accumulate. So here's the thing, as I did say that earlier in the introduction, is that we need to consider that when it comes to the human body, everything affects everything else, and we are energetic beings. So it's and there's loads and loads of evidence, by the way, research-wise, that EMFs do affect everybody, because this is a very powerful energetic input, and because our bodies are energetic, there is no way that we are not affected by it. However, why is it that some people get sick and some people don't? And what actually happens is that even though obviously EMFs are fairly new in our lives, considering how long people have been around for, and how many years EMFs have been around for, it's a fairly new addition to our lives, much like all the toxins in the environment. In the last 100 years, we've introduced thousands and hundreds of thousands of new toxins. And so the human body, even though it does have an incredible capacity for healing, and it has incredible ability to adapt to various demands that we put on it, this can only happen over time. And what we're doing in today's society is that we're bombarding our bodies with toxins, and EMFs being one of them. It's just a different type of toxin, but it's still a toxin. And so what we find is that our bodies just cannot adapt fast enough. And the problem here is that it's not just one thing. It's never just one thing. In other words, you're not necessarily going to get chronically sick from EMFs if your body's functioning perfectly fine otherwise. And when you don't have a lot of stress on your nervous system, for instance, then you will have a lot higher level of tolerance to EMFs. But unfortunately, a lot of people have issues with infections, chronic infections, toxicity, leaky gut, food sensitivities, because of all the toxicity in the environment. And then obviously there's emotional toxicity, which I do talk a lot about, because it's a very underestimated and underappreciated area of health that people don't really pay enough attention to. So when we're talking about all of those impacts and influences, negative influences on the human body in an energetic sense, chemical sense, and emotional sense, then all of that, when that adds up and it all comes together, this is where over time this is going to knock you out. Because like I said, if it was just one factor, the body has a lot of coping mechanisms, a lot of strategies that it can put in place in order to compensate for some of the negative influences from the environment. But we are getting to the point, and all the 5G and all the nonsense that where we headed really with all this, is that this is just too much. It's just too much. So the toxins in the food, the emotional toxicity, the toxicity coming from all those energetic influences around us, that's the issue. The issue is the accumulation of all of those factors. It's not just one thing, which means that when it comes to healing from hypersensitivity to electromagnetic fields, people need to consider all of those different boxes to tick. It's not just about shielding your house. It's about offloading your nervous system, offloading your immune system, because your nervous system connects to your immune system, connects to your endocrine system. So if you go through, if you detox your food, if you start eating organic foods, GMO-free foods, if you then look at emotional toxicity that you have and you eliminate that, if you then look at how well does my gut function, do I have susceptibility to different foods, in which case you would have a leaky gut component. If you then heal that, if you look at different toxins, maybe you have heavy metal toxicity, and that's very common when people are hypersensitive to EMFs that probably have some level of heavy metal toxicity. So when you then healing, you do need to be thinking, what else is my body burdened with to get it to a point where I cannot tolerate those energetic influences around me? Because not everybody gets sick from that. Even though everybody is affected, not everybody gets to the point where they're basically disabled by it, right? So
Right.
does that make sense so far? So this is a bigger thing here. We can't just look at the EMFs as the major culprit here, because there will be different things. Like I said before, if it was just EMFs that you had a problem with, you wouldn't really have, your health wouldn't basically spiral down out of control, because your body would compensate. But because of all of those other influences, that when it all comes together and over time basically damages the body, the tissues, the cells, and organs, then that is when people collapse. That is when they start being seriously aware of their symptoms, to the point where a lot of people with electromagnetic hypersensitivity are just not able to function. But it only happens when you get that accumulation of factors, and obviously it happens over time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had wondered if women had were more sensitive. I remember reading a statistic about how neurological issues have gone up. I think the figure I saw was 699% in the last, it would have to be this window when the frequencies have accelerated. And I agree with you. And I think there's a complication here in the fact that the additional emotional toxicity comes from the content too, is my opinion. Like, it depends on what you're looking at, but I've noticed, I'm here in America though, it may be different where you are. There's, the content is a lot darker, and that adds to this state of anxiety. It's kind of something that builds on itself if you're in it. And I know with the Internet of Things and 5G, they're creating a system that you will be a part of, that your body will merge with, which the alternative is to have the technology. We're using it now in such a wonderful way to let it be the tool, but we find that balance. And I wanted to, one thing that I've noticed the last few years is that there isn't that sense of detoxing like seasonally. Like I'm not seeing that in my family in particular, like my extended family, like and friends. It's kind of this sense of stress not finding its release point during the year, even like, whereas usually you would have the descent in the fall and go into the dark and have kind of a regeneration and then have a rebirth in the spring. I don't know if that makes sense to you. If
Yeah,
you've
it does, but we're
yeah.
completely out of sync with those things. We're completely out of sync. I agree with you. Very, very, very few people are actually in sync with nature and with the seasons and all of those things. It's very true. But that's because of, well, this is how the Western society is structured, I suppose, and functions, and that is dragging us further away. And so, in the end, what we see, I see a lot details, but then I am immersed in the health space with a lot of, and I'm surrounded by people with a lot of chronic symptoms and illnesses, because that's what I deal with. That's my job. So obviously, what I see is that people don't necessarily think about detoxification as, which they definitely should, as something that you just do regularly. It's more of a case of, oh, I'm feeling really terrible and I've just had this diagnosis, and so now I need to detox. But the truth is, because of all the hundreds of thousands of chemicals, like I said, that we've introduced in the last 100 years, it's true that the body has a very sophisticated detoxification system, but we are just putting too much on it for it to be able to function properly, and not not malfunction, but it's going to fall short because there's just too much of an overload. So really, we need to be thinking detox pretty much all year round. And the best thing to do is to remove the most toxic things from your environment to begin with, so you don't have to detox them. So don't use toxic cosmetics. Don't use food that is heavily sprayed with glyphosate and various other chemicals. So if you sort of, that's the first step, is to not to put the toxins in as much as possible. And then, of course, we're talking about EMFs, so also be very sensible how you're managing your exposure to EMFs. So it could be something very simple. You don't have to go and shield your house straight away, because you will find that you can make small changes, like not have any energetic influences in the bedroom, don't have your mobile phone in the bedroom overnight, switch your internet off overnight. It's simple things like that it will actually add up, make a difference. So really, when we're thinking about detox, we need to be thinking, how do we stop putting the toxins into the system in the first place? And then the next step is to actually, certain toxins would have been there for a long time, like heavy metals, for instance, and it will also take time to detox them. So that's the next step. So once we know that certain toxins are there, we obviously need to take steps to offload the body, because when we offload the body, and we deal with the emotional toxicity as well, because that's really, really important, then we find that the tolerance to electromagnetic fields will improve. So that's really the approach that I would take.
Yeah, and I have been, interested in this rest and digest, and because I think that is the kind of on the micro level, what we're talking about is of the regeneration on the seasonal level, and that's where you can start to kind of hit those calmer. Sometimes I think of it like an ocean, and it's kind of raging inside, and then you do kind of have to face it. I think one of the attractions of all this technology is the illusion that you're connected, and then it's difficult to feel like you have community for some people, but to find that space, I feel like I had that kind of baseline. So I knew that something was happening to me, and I was getting really off balance emotionally, and then a lot of it has to do with what you're watching, like what you're getting into, the content. And so then, but I wonder about generations coming up that are fully immersed in it. They may not know the baseline. They may not have that sense of not being connected to the frequencies, especially if they grow up in a city where they're immersed in it, or if they have their school is everybody's got a laptop. So there's a societal component too, that it can feel like you're swimming against the current. Yeah. Do you see more people though choosing to reclaim that space, that deeper, more relaxed space?
Yeah, unfortunately, only when they get sick. But I think that's human nature, you know.
Yeah.
We don't, as human beings, do very well with prevention, even though it makes a lot more sense to be preventative than to having to heal the body when it breaks down, once it's broken down. But that's just not what humans are like. Everybody thinks they can get away with it until the point when they can't get away with it because they're falling apart. So that's what I tend to see, unfortunately. Yeah. But we all do it. We all do it. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. We all do it. It's just part of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you will push, and you will do the certain things that you think you should be doing, or you need to be doing, or you want to be doing, not necessarily staying connected to the body. And what that means is people don't listen to their bodies really. And then it comes a time where the body will make them listen. But at that point, the body's already not just started to break down. In fact, when you have chronic symptoms, what's actually started to happen, the body's already taking steps to repair itself. But that's the point where people freak out and say, wow, I'm having all these symptoms, I better pay attention and do something about it. But the actual fact, by the time you have chronic symptoms and you're aware of the symptoms, by that time, the body's already fighting to repair itself and regenerate itself, right?
Right, those really loud, it's more like the body is screaming.
Yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm, instead of more subtle. And that's, where these frequencies are much bolder or something, or sharper than these more subtle senses that we are it's kind of crowding them out. You had mentioned a technique I was interested in hearing more about, heavening. I've never heard of that, and you had mentioned it when you were on with Lloyd.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe that? Is that something that you recommend if people are very overwhelmed?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk about havening in a moment. I just wanted to go back to what you said about the rest and digest. So rest and digest, I really call it rest, digest, and heal, because what actually is happening as a result of a lot of people, whether they actually have got chronic illness diagnosis or not, but they may have some chronic symptoms. Maybe they're not sleeping well. Maybe they have some digestible disturbances. Maybe they have headaches. That's already a start of something bigger that is brewing under the surface, right? And there's obviously two parts to the autonomic nervous system that people will know, I'm sure, is obviously the fight and flight, or fight, flight, freeze, and appease. And then there is rest, digest, and heal response. And what a lot of people don't realize is that you can't actually heal when you're constantly in fight or flight. You cannot heal. So if you have some healing to do, whether it's overcoming EMF sensitivity or anything else, you do need to switch to that parasympathetic nervous system response, which is the rest and digest and heal response. And most people these days spend most of their days in fight or flight. So what that means is that the nervous system is constantly activated, because people have 3 jobs and kids, and then they stress about what people say and what people, what this one said this and this one said that, and they rehearse the future. They have anxieties, they have fears, they have conflict in their minds. They want to go one way, but they feel they should go another way, etc. So all of these things actually add up to the sympathetic activation, and that constant activation of the nervous system stops people from healing. So if you constantly in sympathetic activation, you will be breaking your body down. So I think that's a really, really important thing to remember. If there's any healing to do, we need to switch the body to the parasympathetic response, and we can only be in one or the other. We cannot be in both at the same time. So if you're in fight or flight, you cannot be in rest and digest and heal, and vice versa. So obviously there are numerous techniques that enable you to switch over to the parasympathetic, which is awesome, and people will know about, I'm sure, slow breathing exercises, yoga, mindfulness, meditation. All of those obviously are designed to make the system calm down, to make the HPA axis calm down, and they promote the regeneration and renewal of tissues. And havening technique is one of these wonderful tools that people can use. And that what is nice about it is that this is not just something that I will use in therapy with people, but people can actually use it on themselves. And there are obviously different applications of this, but in its very kind of basic form, havening, this havening as in haven, safe place, havening, that's what's called havening. Mm-hmm. So if people want to look up the technique itself, they can either go to my website or go to havening.org website, and there's loads of research papers and the videos of the technique itself. And so what this is, it's a psychosensory technique, and that basically by stimulating the receptors on your skin in certain parts of the body, you are acting directly on the amygdala part of the brain, the part of the brain that is responsible for processing emotions. So in the very basic very basic way of using it is, for instance, if you feel that you've activated, so you feel anxious, you feel fearful, you feel sad, you feel upset, you feel angry, you feel frustrated, any negative emotion that you don't want to be feeling, you can use this technique and immediately, literally within a few minutes, that feeling will subside. It's very, very effective, very quick. Of course, when I use it, I do work with complex trauma, emotional trauma, and obviously I use it in a slightly more advanced way, but people can actually use it on themselves with very good results. So I do encourage people to look it up. And the key point in this technique is that when we are stressed out or when we go through a traumatic experience, we really push our brain through the roof, and the brainwave activity is very high in those situations. And what havening does is that it lowers the brainwave activity to all the way down to delta waves. This is the lowest level of brain activity that we experience during deep sleep. And this is actually one of the main, if you will, advantages of this form of therapy, because it just basically remodels the brain, if you will. It can remodel your neurology so very, very effectively and quickly. And so to give you an example, obviously I work mostly with complex trauma, complex chronic conditions, because I work with emotional toxicity and trauma in relation to chronic illness. So there's a lot of complexity in that, but obviously I use one of the key tools I use is Havening. I do use other tools also. But what you find is that, for instance, if it's something straightforward, something like phobia, obviously phobia also can be complicated, but there also are, people who have straightforward phobias. You can sort out a phobia with this technique, for instance, that is a straightforward phobia that somebody may have struggled with this for years, and I can sort it out for them, or they can sort it out for themselves in a matter of 20, 30 minutes, if not less. So, and once those neural pathways are remodeled and rearranged, that's it. That's it. That's your new state. So you don't revert back to where you were before. So it's a permanent result in that respect. So that's quite important to mention. Makes sense?
Yes. And one thing you mentioned, I perked up when I heard you say that the body can regenerate itself. In terms of the nervous system, how long does it take to, I mean, I'm sure it's different for everyone. The nervous system, can you describe kind of what it is? It's these nerves around in our bodies, but what is your sense of how it heals? And it sounds like you say it can regenerate itself.
So let me just say that there is such a thing as a point of no return. So when you have different neurodegenerative diseases, that you can get to the point where you will not regenerate. And also with age, that also happens, that we can't necessarily, if something is really, really damaged, we can't regenerate that. But I'm sure people have heard of neuroplasticity. So we can create new neural connections, you see, and that's really what we need to be focusing on. So it's not so much, maybe I did not express myself, but obviously tissues can regenerate and repair throughout the body because they're doing that all the time. We end up with practically new body every 6 years. That's like the whole body is new cells, new tissues laid down. So every 6 years, if you will. Obviously it's not all happening. So different tissues and cells regenerate at different rates. But actually, just to kind of give an idea, we end up with basically a new body every 6 years. So there is that massive potential for regeneration. But in terms of the nervous system itself, it's really the neuroplasticity that we're so excited about these days, because what that means is that even if somebody has a stroke or something really traumatic happens, even if we can't repair that exact pathway or the neurons that have been damaged, laying down those new ones and creating the new neural pathways, what that means is that the function will be maintained. Or in case of somebody, say, who had a stroke, they can restore the function. So that's really the exciting part, and there is an awful lot of potential for that. The new neural pathway can be laid down very quickly, and for instance, when we learn new things, we establish new neural connections when we learn new things all the time. But of course, then we need to consolidate that pathway, and that's a bit of a longer process in terms of consolidation. So if somebody, I don't know, they're learning to throw a ball, and they do it once and they starting to connect with that, to consistently do the same maneuver time and time again, of course they need to practice, they need to repeat that action. The same with playing an instrument or whatever, right? So, right. But these are essentially new neural connections being laid within the nervous system. So it's a marvelous, very sort of fluid structure, fluid entity within our bodies. But what is also really important to know is that obviously this is not just functioning in the vacuum on its own. The nervous system basically affects pretty much everything that goes on in the body, and the particular close connection that exists is between the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, which is the hormonal system. Which is why when you said sometimes you see that certain conditions are more prevalent in women, that would be the hormonal bit. It's because obviously if they're more influenced by hormones, then oftentimes it can mean that it will be more prevalent in the female population or in the male population, depending on obviously what is being influenced. But that very strong relationship that exists between the nervous system, the immune system, and the hormonal system is really, really important because they feed into each other. So if we have a hormonal imbalance in the body because, I don't know, we eat some chemicals that was great on our food and we balance it through that can have a knock-on effect on our immune function, but it can also have an effect on our nervous function and vice versa. So it all kind of, everything affects everything else, like I said before. Does that explain what you were asking?
Yes. I mean, it's just amazing, the human body. And I know that when you're deeply immersed in kind of this smart environment, it interferes with that cell-to-cell communication, and it disrupts the nervous system. In some ways, if you're a relatively healthy person, but you do feel sensitive to EMFs, the solution is kind of simple. It's it's a natural solution, and to find balance and to find those deeper states. You had mentioned the delta state. There are many things that kind of amp us up and keep us kind of, tense, and to unwind. Do you have any? We're getting toward the end of the program here. Do you have any other tips? One thing about a lot of these, like an eating disorder that has maybe has an emotional root, do you feel that first it would be helpful to disengage from a lot of the tech? Is that something you recommend as part of a holistic program?
Eating disorders are quite unique in that we're talking about deep erosion of identity here. The self is really, really eroded, and of course, I don't really feel that anybody can actually successfully. Well, maybe there are some unique individuals who can do that, but with eating disorders, I really do think this is one of those things where you really, really do need some input from professional. But in terms of the holistic approach, definitely, because essentially when you on social media, for example, all the time, you were talking about the content, and that's going to definitely be damaging further to this person's identity because they're already very vulnerable, and they have a certain perception of self that is obviously quite eroded and quite unhealthy. So connecting with fake stuff all over the internet is only going to make it worse. However, this is easier said than done because often those people find it really, really difficult to resist that. So they're sort of, they can dig their own hole a little bit. But in terms of the overload, also, this is just the content bit. But obviously, in terms of the overload of the nervous system, then as a holistic approach, we need to be looking at things like heavy metal toxicity. There could be some heavy metal toxicity in the brain tissue that's making somebody more anxious and more prone to obsessive behaviors, which obviously the eating disorder will fall into that category. There could be gut issues that are, again, making those, contributing to those neuro sort of psychological neural kind of symptoms as well. And then obviously it's all the emotional toxicity, such as early childhood trauma, such as being in a toxic relationship, such as everyday stress, all of that. So the holistic approach can be, there are different boxes to tick, basically. There will not be one thing that is going to sort it out. And this is why, particularly with eating disorders, I would say this is something that needs to be done with some help, because those people need somebody to break it down for them and make them understand that, there's different things that need to fall into place. But whether it's actually eating disorders or whether it is any other, whether it's psychological in nature or physical in nature, any health complaints whatsoever will always benefit from offloading the nervous system, always. In fact, when you're talking about, you will often hear these days that most all chronic illness results from inflammation in the body. Well, yeah, but where's that inflammation coming from? There's obviously different sources of this inflammation, but ultimately, when you offload the nervous system, you also lower the inflammation. Therefore, you're making yourself less prone to any chronic health issues, whether they are psychological or physical. So that always helps, and I think that's a good place to start. But we do need to remember that there are those different layers, like I was talking about toxicity, I was talking about gut, I was talking about looking at those sensitivities, various things like that. So all of those things can make those health problems worse. And in terms of tips on how to offload your nervous system and how to calm the system down, obviously there's different tools. There's loads of guided meditations. Of course, you can attend yoga classes, Tai Chi classes, and all of that. Obviously, all of that is great. But what I would say is really, really important is not to think that you're going to do 2 hours of yoga once a week and that's going to take care of it. Instead, what you need to be thinking of is, how do I, throughout the day, periodically bring myself back down to the parasympathetic response? And it could be as simple as taking 10 long deep breaths. That's literally a few minutes, and you will induce that state. And then you can even, set yourself little reminders or write yourself, like set your alarm clock to know that like every hour or every couple of hours you're doing a few minutes of havening, or a few minutes of breathing, or a few minutes of just guided imagery, or not even guided imagery. You could just sit on your own without even listening to a guided imagery recording, but in your mind, in your eyes mind, you go to a place where it's safe for you and you feel good, and you just imagine yourself being in that place for a few minutes. That's essentially self-hypnosis, and that will also induce the parasympathetic response. So there's loads and loads of different things we can do, but the important thing is that we keep this, it's like a drip, 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 drip throughout the day, rather than think, oh, I'm just going to do 2 hours of meditation once a week, because that doesn't quite do it. We need to regularly pull ourselves down from this hyperactivated state that so many people are in these days. So I hope that is a helpful tip, because that really, really works. And you will then find that your physical body starts to function a lot better when you do that.
Yeah, you're using your imagination. I do that with imagining myself in a forest, And it's kind of become a very familiar place. And so it's a way to retreat. And I think like anything, you have to strengthen it, and then it becomes like that place you can go to.
Yeah,
Yes.
and even if you are in a place, obviously if you're in the middle of the city, that's difficult. But if you happen to be in a place where you can actually just go outside 5 minutes and take a few deep breaths there, maybe you have some plants around you and connect with that. Connecting with nature is amazing for your nervous system. If you have any water nearby, that's been shown. Research has shown that calms the human body down very, very well as well. So if you happen to live somewhere where you can go and sit by a lake or by a river, that would be massively helpful. You don't have to do it for a long time, but it's just those periodic activities. That is what makes all the difference.
Yes, I was at the ocean recently, and I was floating, and I hadn't felt that relaxed in a long time. Just the sea and the sky, and I was looking at clouds, and we do need those resets. And I so appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom with us. I know that there's a lot more, and tell the listeners where they can find you to find out more about what you offer.
My website is the best place, and you will, from there you will sort of get directed to various things that I do, and it's dreva.com, dr-eva.com. So that's the site, nice and simple. And I do, obviously, as I said, I do work with emotional toxicity, emotional trauma in relation to chronic illness. I do work predominantly with autoimmunity, but not exclusively. I also run retreats. So yeah, check out the website, see whether there's anything there. There's some obviously articles there on some of the things that we're talking about. I've got an emotional toxicity questionnaire that people can take to just see where they're at. So that there's lots of stuff there. So yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Eva. I really enjoyed it, and I'll be sending you where you can hear the interview, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.